please get started.
Good afternoon. I think I don't need further introductions. I think most of you have been working with me this last year. When I was invited to come here and give this talk, I was asked to talk a little bit about my experience and how I entered this crazy world that we call landscape architecture. And I was thinking, how could I present this idea without just coming here and presenting some of my projects, or the projects that I had the pleasure of working on. And there is something that has been concerning me since I joined the university, and I've been working with a lot of students asking me or telling me that they are not completely or 100% sure that this is the path they want to follow once they graduate. And I really understand that concern, because I felt that once I graduated. So my presentation will be a little bit talking about what I have been doing since 2007. That's the year when I graduated. So I'm older than you, of course, but I'm not that old. So I still remember when I was a student and my struggles then. And I will try to explain a little bit of my path since then, and some of my main projects, and how those projects have been supporting everything else that I've been doing so far. So, when my final year was pretty much like most of you now. I was really struggling with my final project, with the final dissertation, and some of us, I'm included in this part, were kind of really struggling to manage everything and to try to finish everything on time. Eventually I asked for an extension, which is something that I do not recommend, but if you want to, you always have this opportunity. And eventually we reached this big day, this graduation day, and we were all so happy because we had finally accomplished something that, well, for me was really important, because I spent 5 years of my life studying to be a landscape architect, and I was really happy when I graduated. But then, after 1 or 2 days, or at least 1 or 2 months, let's say, most of us start wondering, what exactly do we want to do? And sometimes it concerns our professional degree, but sometimes it's something completely different. And so I started wondering what my friends have been doing since 2007. So we were a big class, like the second year now. We were 40 students that graduated in 2007. And I'm in touch with most of them still, and I started wondering what they're doing now. This is kind of crazy. So one has become a product designer, out of the 40, of course. One entered the jewelry worlds. One is in wine production. One you cannot see, eventually, something called, I think it's wildlife manager. One is in food production. One is in 3D animation. He went to California and now is trying to work with Pixar. 3 have become lecturers or researchers. I include myself in this group, of course. 1 is in finance. I wonder why, because this is crazy. 2 have become painters. 1 is a rugby. He actually joined the national team. Well, it's not a big deal like it is in Scotland, but we're getting there. 1 is actor. She works in Barcelona. 1 is a ballet dancer. Well, and 1 is a musician. So that means that out of those 40 students, almost 40% are non-designers today. And that is perfectly okay. So, and how do I know that? Well, you can see this from 2 different perspectives. Either this went terribly wrong, or, as I like to think, this went terribly right. And the thing that supports my argument is that most of these people are quite happy now with their lives. And the funny thing about this is that when I started asking, I did really little research on this, and I started asking them, how would they describe themselves, despite the fact that they do completely different things. And they all said, without any kind of doubts, that they are still landscape architects. So the thing about this is that landscape architecture really gives us a way of understanding the world, and this is kind of what I'm going to show you now. So, when we graduated, three of us, we were kind of deciding what should we do. Should we join a professional practice studio? Should we do something else like becoming a musician? Or should we stick to landscape architecture? And so eventually we got together and we created this very, very small practice studio that is still running in Lisbon. I'm still part of it, with this unpronounceable name in English. And with this, since 2007, the end of 2007, I've been working in different projects. I'm just presenting you 2 or 3, I guess, just to show you some important things. The first one had to do with landscape patterns. And it was a competition for a beautiful site in Portugal, in the middle of Portugal, whose name I won't say, again, is really hard for you. But it was the competition, the idea of the competition in this beautiful site was to rearrange an outdoor market close to the urban cluster up there. And so the outdoor market is already running, but they wanted to rearrange this because of one of the national exhibitions they were hosting there. And our idea was to think about what an outdoor market really means to this kind of towns. So they have a market every month. That means they use the space 12 days per year to have this market. Plus those special markets to sell local products and stuff like that. That would give us an amount of 30 days per year to use this as a market. So that means that for the remaining 335 days, this space would have absolutely no use, and this was completely fenced. So our concept was to still keep the market here because it's a very important feature in this town, but to create an urban park that would be flexible enough to host that market, but still work as a park and would kind of make the transition between the very organic urban patterns of the town center, it's a very old town center, and the very rigid lines coming from the rice paddy. So it's the only place in Europe, or one of the only places in Europe, I think it's the only one, where we can actually produce rice. And so the competition had to do with these landscape patterns that we were having from the urban cluster and from the agricultural fields, and how to merge them into a more or less cohesive plan. And of course, we never work alone, even when we are young. In this case, we were working with a young team of architects as well, so we had the opportunity of developing some modular boxes that would work as cafes or as workshops or small shops, and of course we still had to enable some sort of market for that place. So I'm presenting those projects really briefly just to give you some sort of reasoning that is underpinning my presentation. The second project was a project in 2009, I guess, for this kind of chaos that we've got. It's one of the worst sites in Portugal, in the north of Portugal. It has a very strong industrial character, and it's this. The idea of the competition was to rethink the urban diffuse of this area, and the problem is that this diffuse mass is completely erasing all the traditional signs that exist in the landscape. So the problem was not the land uses. This is a system with a mixed use, so we had industry, we had agriculture, we had forest, we also had residential fabrics. So the problem was not with the land use, the problem was with the lack of hierarchical systems between those land uses, and especially because those different, this is a regional study, those different towns existing there were lacking magnetism in order to structure the entire territory. So this land was dying, basically. And the thing is that we predicted that if we did nothing to reverse this process, in between 50 to 100 years, this territory would be completely dead. Because people are moving out, because they're abandoning agriculture, forest is not as dynamic as it should be, and the lack of structure in this territory would kill it. So the idea was to create something that could eventually reverse this. So let's step back. And so the idea was, okay, so let's try to do something to reverse this, but what could we eventually do? And so our process was to reorganize the territory without completely erasing what was going on there, of course, but to reinforce the territorial role of the town centers. So the fact that the territory is not being used now as it should be is because people want to move into the cities. Of course, that is the normal tendency. So we said, okay, let's put people where they want to be, that is in the town center, and let's leave the territory to be appropriated with more contemporary meanings, such as educational programs, or different types of agriculture, or different types of forestry. And eventually, we evolved from that model, that territorial model that we have on the left, to this one on the right. Of course, I'm mainly presenting you ideas competitions because that is my area of expertise. This, of course, was just to give ideas to the local authorities. They will never build something out of these models. They just wanted to understand what teams of professionals could eventually think about this. The third project I'm showing from this kind of stage of my life is a project for the south of Portugal. And this project was really funny because this is a wonderful site. I don't know some of you might have been in the Algarve, the south region of Portugal, where I have this kind of sand barriers that protect the marshland and the inland, of course. And the funny thing about this competition is that this competition was clearly for landscape architects and urban planners, but it was prepared for architects. So they gathered lots of teams of architects, and then architects didn't know how to deal with this. So they started asking urban planners and landscape architects to join the team, and that's what happened to us. So we joined a team of young architects, and the idea of this competition, because this landscape is really remarkable, but there are some problems. For instance, the fact that they built an airport in the marshland. Of course, this is a problem in terms of land use, and it's complete nonsense. And one of the biggest problems is that one of these islands, I don't know, you cannot see, unfortunately, one of these islands, the most important one. So back in the 1960s, before our revolution, we used to have a dictatorship, and then in 1974 we had this revolution in Portugal. And before that, we started preparing things, because the funny thing about Portugal is that we prepared the revolution, so everyone was prepared to have the revolution, and when the revolution started, everyone was just sitting at home watching the TV to see what was happening. So no one went to the streets, nothing like that. But the funny thing about this is that from the 60s, we started preparing the process of giving up on our colonies. Of course, we were disassembling our kind of lost empire. And that meant that loads of people from those colonies, from Angola, Mozambique, and all those colonies that we used to have, they were returning to Portugal. And they needed houses. So they started building their own houses in slums, in the peripheral areas of our city centers. And this island received a massive amount of people building their houses on the sand dunes, which is a very dynamic and unstable landscape. Of course, since then, and we are on the third generation now of those people living there, some of the houses are destroyed every year because of the sea, and they still build the same, like the same house, they replicate the house, and they build on site every single year, which is, it might sound stupid, But the thing is that these people are really attached to this place. So the idea of the competition was to, because local authorities do not like these slums, and they want to take people out of here. So they said, well, we will launch this competition to see what architects have to say about this. And the idea is to just destroy all the houses and put people back into the mainland. But what we said was that, okay, we can do that, but let's try to do things properly. So instead of just saying that people have to leave their houses and leave their lives back like all at once, let's think about a process that can, an urban process that can eventually lead, that can eventually deal with that and lead to other dynamics. So the idea was to remove only the first line of houses, the first line of houses on the direction of the sea, and to replace that space with a big sand dune here, this sand dune, that would work as a barrier that would protect the rest of the houses. And for in the longer term, we could convince the rest of the people that this site was dangerous to live in, and so people could be offered plots in the mainland, and then step by step we would claim this land back. So this was a landscape reclamation project in a certain sense. Of course, there were lots of architecture because this was an architectural-led competition, but the main idea was to create this sand dune that would work as a barrier. Okay, so after this, in 2009, the end of 2009, I was invited by some of you have seen the lecture, David Skinner's lecture last week. That guy used to be my professor back in Lisbon, and he has this big practice studio, mainly based in Lisbon, called ProUp. And he invited me to join his team, basically. And when I joined it, it was almost 40 people, so it's kind of large for the European context in terms of landscape architecture, of course. And I was quite surprised to be invited, because that's a very important studio with loads of overseas, very important work internationally. So I decided to accept the challenge, and when I got there, I saw how things were structured. So basically that is a design-led studio. What they do is mainly design. But there are two other sets of processes that support design. One of them is research, the other one is communication. And you will learn when you start working with those professionals. Some of you have already worked. That most of the times we have to convince people that landscape architecture is something good, it's not evil. And so communication is actually a big deal, especially when, like Paul was saying, when we do not talk the same kind of language. We still need to convince people that what we're doing is kind of good. So these processes were kind of underpinning design. And because of my expertise, I joined the design team, but then step by step I started doing research. And I was invited to coordinate that very, very small department doing research. And eventually, when the communication department was created, I was also invited to be part of that team as well. So by the end, when I left the office in 2012, I was mainly doing these two processes that were supporting design. Now I'm just presenting, I think I have two competitions, maybe three, that were part of my participation there. One of them is concerns Remembrance in Oblivion, and most of you have seen this project at least a couple of times, but it is one of, for me, one of the most important projects that we did over there. And it concerns the traumatic landscape from Flanders, so the part of Belgium that is incorporated in the Flemish territory. And the idea of the competition was to create what they call the Remembrance Park, to remember the events that occurred in the First World War there. And this was basically one of our conceptual ideas. That is a very small town centre that exists over there before the war. The image in the centre is immediately after the bombing. So all these small dots are bombs, are the result of bombs. And this is what happened immediately after the war. And yeah, João last week presented the project, and he does that much better than I could ever do. So my idea is just to give you the outputs of this competition. So the idea was to remember the landscape, but when we got there, when we visited that landscape, we could not recognize any signs coming from the war, because soon after the war ended, people were so traumatized that they started immediately erasing all the marks left from the war, and eventually that's what we have now. So like very beautiful agricultural fields, some forestry, ecological areas, but no traces from the war. So what we decided was that instead of designing a remembrance park, we should design two parks within the same park. One would be the remembrance park for those who really wanted to understand that landscape from the perspective of the war and what the war changed. But there was another very important dimension, which was oblivion, how locals have erased all the marks left from war in order to bear the war and to start living there once again. So there was the Remembrance Park and the Oblivion Park. And that park was a very, basically was an open source structure that could be flexible enough to accommodate different wheels, different actors and different policies that would eventually appear along the way. So this was a structure that could eventually be reinforced over time. We were estimating that from that first stage until this last one could be from 20 to 40 years, so it's a long-term process. And there were three elements making this structure: doors, paths, and special sites. Doors would be those points where people would approach the territory and become aware that they were actually entering in this kind of park structure. The paths would lead people along the Remembrance Park or the Oblivion Park, depending on what they wanted to do. And the special sites were, of course, these points of temporal compression, where the two periods, so 100 years ago and present, would eventually merge. And people coming from one path or the other would become aware that this is a territory that deals with a very complex system of layers that make that landscape. So the main output of this competition. So we lost this competition, as you know, I think, but this competition was so important that the local government, the Flemish government, decided to create a book that would explore the concept of Flemish landscape, which is something that is really specific. It's completely different from the French part of Belgium or all the countries surrounding Belgium. And so this is just to make you understand that even when we lose competitions, most of the times we do, those outputs are still interesting if we believe that our work is good. The second one, it concerns the productive land, and it was a competition. It was not a competition, sorry, it was a consultancy. We were consultants in this one. For Val de la Durance is in the southern part of France, and the Côte d'Azur area, so really in the south. And this is the valley. This is the river La Durance. The thing about this competition is that they are La Durance is receiving one of the ITER centers. I don't know if you know what ITER means. I have to read. International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. So it's something big concerning nuclear fusion and stuff like that. And in terms of numbers, it means that 10,000 scientists will be moving here. And along with the scientists come those families with kids, dogs, and all that kind of stuff. Up to 2,000 new actors in this landscape. And so the idea was to rethink the landscape in order to accommodate these new people that had nothing to do in terms of roots, had nothing to do with this landscape, but they were coming here to live, at least for 5 to 10 years, to work on ITER. So our idea was to actually run against the tendency of enlarging city centers, but rather to create a mixed system where we could enhance the productive land. So we had to work with the macro topography. So all of these are subsidiaries to the river, and these are the mountains. We had to work with the macro topography and the general physiographic lines to reinforce the role of landscape ecology. Now the thing, and this is why one of the reasons my presentation is called Trust Me, I'm a Landscape Architect, is that the idea was quite simple, but to communicate it took us like more than 1 year, just to communicate that landscape ecology could have an active role in redesigning this landscape. And eventually we were so fed up that we went to a meeting once and João was completely raging and he just said, trust me, I'm a landscape architect, so I know what I'm doing. And this sometimes, it's not a very good argument I have to say, but still an argument. So from this we went on to understanding what kind of clusters we could build by reinforcing the role of landscape ecology. That is, to reinforce the role of ecological corridors, to understand a matrix, ecoterms, and all that lexicon coming from landscape ecology. And we came up with these small production clusters where people would actually work together for a common purpose. Not only locals that are interested in working with agriculture, but eventually new people coming in that would embrace these kind of very complex systems where we could work on the periphery or near the river or completely apart from the river, but still the idea was to create some sort of value embedded into the land in terms of production. And Val de la Durance is one of the most productive valleys in Europe and is progressively losing its value now. And one of the outputs, once again, was to sell the idea, was to create this series of small books that are now under production. This was just a prototype, to show people that just by bringing one of these big nuclear reactor centers to the landscape does not mean that we have to destroy everything and start from scratch. And I think it is a very wonderful piece. Unfortunately, I don't have one with me, but I really wanted to have the opportunity of showing it to you. The third competition, I promise, is the last one, I hope, before moving on, is something concerning one of my research topics. And it started from this competition for the Milan city centre in Italy. And once again, the idea of the competition was to create a park in a former industrial plant near the city centre. And so the industry was not there anymore. And first of all, they asked for a bunch of star architects, such as Zaha Hadid or Daniel Lipskin, all those stars, to build important buildings such as like a community center, a big new opera house, musician kind of center for new musicians, stuff like that. And all these darker areas represent those buildings. What happened was that they realized, when they started building those buildings, they realized that those buildings were kind of alter egos and they were completely disconnected from each other. So they needed to have a matrix that would eventually sew everything together. And so they decided to host this international competition to create a park with all these constraints already that would, besides that, try to reactivate ecology in the city center. This is the existing situation. Well, part of them, no, this is when it was still industrial, so all those buildings have been demolished, I guess. I don't have pictures of construction, I guess. Oh, yeah, you can see those big buildings being built already. So this competition allowed us to develop one of our research themes, which is the contemporary notion of edge in landscape architecture. And our idea was to work on a new notion of edge that could avoid all sorts of fences, of divisions, of walls, and still promotes a peaceful coexistence between human uses and all other living communities that share the territories with us. And so we ended up creating a very complex morphological system, living from the flat area that we had to deal with in the beginning. We start adding complexity in order to be able to create this peaceful coexistence between humans and ecology, basically. And this was done through 4 different typologies. The first one was terrain modeling, which was the ground basis of everything, of course. The second one was a system of paths that were connected or disconnected from the morphology, depending on what we wanted. The third one was the introduction of water, of wetlands. And the fourth was plant communities. And so, in order to reach this level of complexity. And by doing that, we were able to create big clearings that would work as an urban park, so for humans, and create these big structured landforms that were not inaccessible, so people could actually visit them. But because of the morphology, most people would not go there, and that was good enough for us to think that ecology could actually be activated on those particular sites. But what was good about that was that it allowed us to develop some sort of theoretical research concerning invisible edges. So we understood that from an existential point of view, we need edges, because edges are what separates what is kept inside from what is outside. Edges, it's quite obvious, I know. Edges are really important because that is how we have designed our world. It's the difference between good and evil, or beautiful and ugly. There's always an edge, even if from a theoretical point of view, those edges are needed. And from an historical and political point of view, in terms of architecture and urban planning, most cities have been designed with clear edges that separate what is human from what was natural or wild. And there is a close relationship between that process of designing edges and moments of peace and war. So in times of peace, we could spend more energy and resources in expanding our cities, and most walls would be completely destroyed in order to enlarge the urban perimeter. And in times of war, because of protection, we would build new walls and keep ourselves inside those walls. So that was a retraction moment. And of course, it is political, because the decision of all decisions about edges are political. They imply decisions, especially when concerning architecture or landscape architecture. And there is a very remarkable sentence coming from Rousseau, the French philosopher, saying that, I have to read, the first man who, having fenced in a piece of land, said, "This is mine," and found people naive enough to believe him, that man was the true founder of the civil society. That means that edges imply a decision not only where to put them or when to put them, but actually what we want to fence or what we want to separate. And that us to another conclusion, that edges are also planning tools, leaving from those early concepts coming from Ebenezer Howard's City Garden or Law Homestead Green Necklace. All of you already know this. We reached a moment where we were able to define the concept of green structure. So green structure basically is a strategy that takes all the existing green around a city, or that goes through the city, and combines that with all potential sites for strategy that are not built, and builds some sort of cohesion. And when that structure receives programs like social functions or educational programs or agricultural value, that green structure becomes green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is something that is really hot at the moment in the United States, so everyone is thinking about what green infrastructure can be. And I think from the point of view of this study, green infrastructure is one of the most contemporary planning tools that we can use as landscape architects. And then, of course, as landscape architects, we have to deal with living media. So there was this kind of reasoning underpinning this, which was from biology to landscape ecology. Because when we think about edges, like when we think about natural history, for instance, natural history is a story, or many stories, of designing edges. If we think about a cell, which is one of the simplest life forms we can imagine, a cell only exists because there is a membrane that separates what is inside, intracellular, from what is outside. And that membrane enables some sort of gradients of temperature and pressure that refuse entropy and enable life. And when we start building complexity from that, we see that what landscape ecology tries to do is try to understand how biology works and apply that to landscape, to the landscape range of scales. So probably you've seen these are very famous kind of sketches. Simon Bell often uses them as well. And so the thing is that for landscape architecture, edges are one of the most important landscape features because they are rich, they are diverse, and they are one of the most important tools for us to design right now. Because if you think about what are the main sites where architects and landscape architects are designing, the first book that we produced, it was about celebrating 20 years of existence. So we had some of our most iconic projects, some of our most iconic ideas. Then we did some sort of other publications. I don't have time to talk about them now, unfortunately. And then eventually, I was asked to lead the process of creating a book, and I thought, well, this is very good, but why on earth would you ask me? I'm a landscape architect to produce a book. I have no experience in dealing with graphic designers, and then with publishers, and then with all those mechanisms to sell books on Amazon and stuff like that. So I don't know anything about that. Why are you asking me? And then João said to me once again, I trust you because you're a landscape architect. Which is kind of cool, but it was a process that was really long, really difficult process that took me 1.5 years, I think. But the idea was that ProUp, most of the projects that ProUp has, historically, they come from winning competitions. And just to give you an idea, I was talking with João and Tiago, his partner, one of his partners, when they came here last week, and they told me that since January, they have participated in 2 competitions per week, which is kind of remarkable. I know they're a big team, they have different sub-teams inside that team, but that is kind of exhaustive. But the thing about participating in competitions is that most of the time, we lost them. So the idea was quite clear, was to produce a book that was about this process of losing competitions, but still using those ideas in order to do something useful. So this was the book. Most of you already know. I'm trying to bring these books into the library so that you can see them a little bit better. And just to end my talk now, because I'm taking too long, since I joined the university, I'm having more time to dedicate, well, not that much because of what's happening now, you know, but some time to dedicate to this kind of triangle that is my research now, which is the relationship between landscape, time, and video. I will not talk about time because I gave a lecture first semester. Some of you already saw it. So I'm just talking about video, and I will explain you why. So the research is quite simple. It's to understand the influence of digital media in general and video in particular in the contemporary perceptions of the landscape. And I will start by showing you a very brief moment of a movie from Andy Warhol called Empire that was produced in, was produced in 1964. We're talking about 8 hours of a movie with a black and white movie with no dialogues, without any kind of narrative, without any sort of sounds that put us in a direct contact with the Empire State Building. I must admit that this is really boring. This is just one moment and you can see the entire movie. You can imagine what the entire movie is like, because I've tried to see almost 1 hour and almost fallen asleep like every 5 minutes, but it's as boring as this. It doesn't get any better. But it gave birth to a very important movement in cinema called slow cinema, or what we also call contemplative cinema. And it's a new movement with long, uninterrupted scenes, with almost no dialogues, with almost no narratives. And the idea is to offer several different perspectives to the observer, and to not to lead people too much. There are several very important directors, such as Tarkovsky, I think you know, or Antonioni, an Italian movie maker, and more recently one Thai filmmaker called Vera Setakul, who produced Uncle Bulme, Who Can Recall His Past Lives. I don't know if you know this movie. It is kind of boring but better, and won the Festival of Cannes in 2010, so it's kind of a big deal. And from that contemplative cinema movement, we entered another. Enough about this. We entered another era, which is called the Berlin School of Cinema. The Berlin School of Cinema is more dynamic, with more narrative, and with dialogues at least. But they still kept this idea of long, uninterrupted scenes that offer people different perspectives. And their idea, so this is a movie, I think you know it, as Pina Bausch. It's called, for Pina, from, I don't know the name, it's from Wim Wenders, anyway. You'll find it, it's easy to find. And the idea is that we, in a world with increasing speed, we move faster and more than ever, and we have different types of movements. We have different speeds, and sometimes we have very little or absolutely none. Yeah, we have very little, I would say, very little engagement or perception of what surrounds us. So these movements, these two movements that I'm talking about, can operate eventually to reverse this tendency and allow us to further engage with the contemporary perception of the landscape. So the important aspects to me about video is that today we are all potential filmmakers. If you think about it, we all have some sort of recording equipment, such as digital cams or even our phones, and we can produce small videos. And imagine about the power of this. And some of you have already been working with video in a very intuitive way, and this is the tendency, is that people will start working with video more and more, especially in creative areas such as architecture and landscape architecture, because today showing and selling projects can be done through the use of video, especially because when you work in professional studios on an international level, static renderings are not enough anymore. The clients are more demanding. We need to offer them different experiences. And so, for me, video can become a tool. I'll just show you this. Video can become a tool for analysis and design. So this is just the end of my talk. I just wanted to invite, some of you have already seen this poster, I think. I'm hosting an event called Videoscape, and it's about this, on the 25th of April. I know it's not a very good date for you, but the university offers funds. And then they say, okay, we offer you funds, but you cannot carry over those funds to the next year. So they gave me these funds 2 weeks ago, and they say that I have to host this event right now, like now. And I said, okay, let's think about it. Because I think students are a very important component of this. I want to involve you as part of this process. So I decided to host this on the 25th of April. Let's see if some of you can join us. It would be great. So, just to end, what I wanted to tell you now, because of the initial concern I expressed about you not being totally convinced whether this is what you want to do for the rest of your lives, that is perfectly fine. We do not, even if you want to be a landscape architect, but you feel that you're not a designer, we do not all need to be designers. There are different areas. Luckily enough, landscape architecture is broad enough to accommodate different people with different skills. And what is important is that landscape architecture is a tool that offers us a way of understanding the world. That is the most important thing. Once you get that, you can do whatever you want. Some of you shine in more technical components. Some of you will shine in research. Some of you will become politicians or musicians or ballet dancers. It doesn't matter. The thing is that once you get what landscape architecture is, I believe you will never lose it. And to end, I just wanted to end with this thought. I don't know if you can read. Yeah. This is, I don't know if you know who is Saramago. Saramago is one of our most important Portuguese writers. He has recently passed away. He won the Nobel Prize in 2007, I think. And one of his most important quotes is, "If you can see, look. And if you can look, observe." And, well, I guess, yeah, that's it. Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to make any questions or comments or nothing.
Just Tiago, quickly.
So yeah.
Throughout your time doing some research, have you had the opportunity to see any of your ideas coming to fruition, test your ideas against real circumstance at all?
Well, I have to say no, but I would like to have time to test some of my ideas. But most of the times, the thing is, most of the times, if I understood your question correctly, is how to deal with time and research, right? The thing is that once you start working, most of us are completely overwhelmed by the amount of work we have. And the idea of creating a sub-department inside the practice studio dedicated to research was a nice idea, but the practical side of it is that the research should feed all of those design processes. And if you think about doing 2 competitions per week, requesting research, that is kind of mental, because you need time to do proper research. So one of the reasons, I have to be honest with you, one of the reasons I decided to leave the practice studio and join the university was to further engage with research and try to test my ideas. So the idea of videoscape, for instance, the entire department is now trying to implement a system. I don't know if we are successful to implement a system after this event to incorporate video as an optional component of some of those design processes. So the idea is to allow you to explore with video part of those design processes and to see if we together with you can create some sort of mechanism of research. That is an idea. I don't know if we are successful in doing this, because you know this university is quite complex when it comes to innovation. Well, that's it. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'd just like to thank both our lecturers again. It's great to have you giving us these lectures. We just meet out there and have some drinks and refreshments and chat a little bit if you want to join us. Thank you.